What up, Chop Shop? Welcome to another episode of the Rockets Chop Shop Pod. I got a special friend here, Dave Hardesty, aka Clutchfans, here to talk about his new article titled "Heavy Investment in Kevin Porter Jr. Raises Serious Questions About the Rockets Front Office." Now, Dave, this is obviously this is a lot going on with the team. The Kevin Porter situation, we've talked about it on the channel, multiple times. So our audience is aware of kind of the implications of that legally and, morally, all the things, judicially, all that is going to get sorted out over the next few weeks. But for the Houston Rockets, what we have to really start thinking about is the implications for them, not only going forward, but also, how do we get to this point where we are now in this situation? Because and I've alluded this, all of this didn't happen in a vacuum, right? And I'm gonna have just to clear it out. I am not in any way indicating that anything Rafael Stone or anybody in the Rockets front office directly led Kevin Porter to do anything that he does as far as with this situation. He is a grown man. He has his own volition and he chose to do what he did. But as far as all the other things that got us to where we are, I wanted to kind of talk about that. So overall, I don't think I've heard your take on this situation. Just overall, what was your initial take out of kind of the where we've ended with Kevin Porter Jr.?
You mean as far as like after this news and like
just after the news and. Yeah, because I know a lot of people think you. I'm not gonna say you hated him, but I know there's not a fondness there for Kevin Porter Jr. Obviously, you must have saw some things that kind of you didn't like about his character, or some things that, because I know you hear things that the general public may not. And so what did you like? What was your takeaway from the whole situation?
Well, I mean, obviously the incident is incredibly unfortunate. Heart goes out to the victim. That's just a terrible situation. As far as talking, basketball and how that impacts the Rockets, the Rockets basically gave him a second chance to bring him in here. And, they did that in 2021. I was totally on board with that. I thought there was really good potential with Kevin Porter Jr. It's as they went along, and I don't, blame Rafael Stone or the Rockets front office for making that move. That's, they gave him a second chance, a fresh start, and they were taking a look at his talent. But I think as they went along, there were several instances where the Rockets could see these anger management issues. They could see his immaturity issues. I think we could, if you were really watching, some of these games, several instances where there were problems. And, it's all around unfortunate, a terrible situation. But you do absolutely have to look at the Rockets and say to yourself, like, looking at what they knew and what they went through. Obviously, as you mentioned, they didn't know this was going to happen. But there were several instances where his anger control was out of control. And there were, I think things that hurt the Rockets organization as a whole. People around the league didn't necessarily want maybe their clients or, players, teammates, whatever, to go to Houston because of some of this stuff. So I think you have to look at Rafael Stone, for starters, and the front office as, knowing some of the stuff that they did. Why did they keep investing in him? Why did they keep banking so much on him, even with the unique structure of the contract and the ability to get out of it after 1 year? They still bet pretty heavy on him. And to me, that's unfortunate when you look back at some of that stuff.
Yep, and I think you've hit on several points from the article. One of the quotes, the first one that really stood out to me was you quoted Austin Rivers, which he said, and it says that former Rocket Austin Rivers said this week that this isn't the first, second, or even seventh issue with Porter Jr. and the Rockets. Higher ups, in quotes, confided in him that they had no idea how to handle him. And then he's quoted saying, "I remember talking to guys in the Houston Rockets organization, higher ups, and they were having issues then," said Rivers. they were like, we don't know what to do with him. And that's when just got there from Cleveland. And what, for me, when I'm reading that, I'm thinking what you just pointed out with Rafael Stone. Um, the situation for Kevin coming in from Cleveland, like you said, a second chance is great. Where I think the second chance really was not really set up to be successful in the beginning was that they never really let him hit rock bottom. And this is something that I've brought up on a previous podcast. I think I did with Kelly Eco, is that when you go to a situation where, like he did, where he's actually being disciplined by the Cavs, where they want him off the team, for the Rockets to have taken him into a situation where he is then given basically as a hero's welcome, you never really get to learn the lesson from your mistake. And it seems like going forward, they kept that up where he would do things like, you mentioned in the article where there was a point he even shoved John Lucas, the game that he ended up leaving at halftime, where he put his hands on the coach. And the discipline that you would get back from the team just never matched the actions that he was taking. Now, I'm no psychologist, but, even if you've raised children, if they do bad things and you give them prizes for it, you're just enabling them to be able to continue that type of behavior. And it seemed that the Rockets never really held him accountable for some of his actions. Would you say that that's something that was a characteristic of that relationship?
100% accurate. 100%. I think that's. I think what was so frustrating about this. You heard stuff about the Rockets culture, AAU team in the NBA, and kind of letting these guys just your turn, my turn, and that kind of stuff. But when you actually dig into behind the scenes, they felt. Well, I say they. I'm talking about KPJ specifically, not Jalen Green. But KPJ felt empowered in that way. He didn't feel the coaches could or had the power to bench him. And in a way, they didn't, because this was a very calculated rebuild. He was there to be groomed as the point guard. The Rockets weren't going to, with all due respect to DJ Augustine or somebody like that, they weren't going to just roll out a vet point guard. They were grooming Kevin Porter Jr. to be their future point guard. So he knew he had that cachet with the GM and with the front office, and unfortunately, it empowered him. So it's frustrating. I mean, don't get me wrong, Silas. I think Ime would have handled it better as far as some of that accountability. And likewise, this season is going to be different than the way the Rockets viewed before, where they were kind of, for lack of a better term, it's a loaded term, but tanking in the past.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, even before this incident occurred, many people wondered inside the Rockets circle how this was going to go with Ime, or if KPJ was coming off the bench, how was that going to be handled? Because you just didn't know what you were going to get from KPJ day to day. That's basically how it was. So there could be a day where he did not handle it well. You described it perfectly accurate, in my opinion. That's the unfortunate part about this. There was no accountability. Some of it was Silas's hands were tied. There's many ways to criticize the front office for how that was handled.
Right.
These young players are watching this as well. Jabari Smith is coming into that environment. Jalen Green is, partnered up with him, is coming into that environment. Şengün as well. So it's frustrating all around as a Rockets fan to hear some of that stuff.
And just pivoting over to, the key person and personnel for the Rockets, Rafael Stone, it does beg the question as far as what his perception of Kevin Porter Jr. was in his eyes. Obviously, a lot of us saw him as a talented young player. Not he's not a star or anything, but if he can get his head on straight, he could be a decent NBA player. It does seem like Stone saw something bigger than that. And you quoted from the article, you said trading for him in January 2021 was seen by some with the team as his, quote, Harden acquisition, code for signature move that makes an executive career, much in the way landing James Harden did for Daryl Morey in 2012. For example, and you just said this, former Rockets coach Stephen Silas never considered Porter Jr. to be a point guard. Per sources, playing him there was a Stone mandate because the GM believed that is where his future lied. So for Rafael Stone, and I was having this discussion earlier with some friends talking about this situation, whether Stone should be on the hot seat or not, given I'm not sure if his this free agency is exactly what the Rockets wanted with that $60+ million in cap space. I know Brook Lopez was a landing they wanted. I know they didn't want to give away, even though Garuba and those guys aren't great players, but you don't just give away former first round picks for nothing. I know they probably didn't think they would end up paying Fred what they paid him. Regardless, I was still happy with the offseason, but I'm not sure. I think the best thing they did was sign Ime Udoka. But for Rafael Stone, up to this point, it seems like if it was just for tanking, which is the argument I've heard from some fans about what we did throughout the years, that they use Kevin Porter as a tanking tool, then you don't really do some of the other stuff he did, like give up playing time and reps on ball for KPJ against Jalen Green, a guy who you drafted number 2. You don't, like you pointed out in the article, tried the Bruno Fernando um, experiment in place of Şengün, a more talented player that you drafted in the first round. You don't send John Wall home and pay him $80+ million to not be on there so he doesn't compete. And what comes to mind for me is all these, like you said, all these comments from people external to their organization, former players. I read the article, bro, and I put a tweet out that said it's almost like when if somebody's a drug addict and they get clean, and somebody has tape or something, or like when you're an alcoholic and somebody recorded you drunk one day. That's what it looks like with all these things that trickled out over the years. I know you've been on it, but I feel like as a fan base, we were just blinded.
Mm.
Because if you take a step back and look at it in a big picture view, this is bad. Some
Yeah.
really bad stuff.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's a video in the article of a game in, I think, 2022 against the Grizzlies, and I went back and watched just even before it got to be a maturity issue that was illustrated there from KBJ, the basketball that was being played, and my jaw was kind of on the floor. And I saw your tweet, and I agree with it, and like I'm hoping we are, past some of that. To kind of get to your initial question, I don't know if it should be hot, but I definitely think he should be warm. I think this season is probably really critical for him. If you look at Rafael Stone and his tenure here, there have been some good things, there have been some mistakes, but there's really 2 moves. You could maybe argue that trading for Şengün, although there's, talking about analytics really stepping up in that one. But there's 2 moves that were truly signature moves for Rafael Stone. One was acquiring KPJ, and the other one was Jalen Green over Evan Mobley. And time will tell on the Green over Mobley. But his other picks, I mean, while being solid picks, Jabari was the obvious at 3. Amen Thompson was the obvious at 4. And he, did very well drafting. Not taking any credit away in Tyrese and Cam Whitmore, but they did fall to him in those picks. Again, still give him props for that. But the signature moves, the ones that were like he put his stamp on, is KPJ and Jalen Green. And so you have to, if KPJ had panned out wonderfully, there would have been numerous articles about how Rafael Stone, with everybody telling him he's crazy, he's the mad scientist, he should not keep continuing with this guy. He stuck it out and it paid off. And instead it blew up. And I think I'm just telling you, Frank, I talked to many people about this. I think that's probably why I got labeled the hater over the last year or so. And media, players, people that work with the Rockets, or I should say work with other teams, like they just didn't understand it. Players do respect KPJ. They respect his skills for sure. He's a tough guard. A tough guy to guard. But even the Rockets would have told you before that as far as, coaches and executives dealing with KPJ, that is not easy. You have to look at what the Rockets did over the last 2 to 3 years and how they got to this point with him and made this kind of investment, and really what it did, in my opinion, to the brand over the last few years. Some of that is at his feet for sure.
Yeah, and I think, you summarized it best when you said whether you look at their ability to value character, evaluate risk, scout basketball, build culture, manage assets, or allocate development resources, they failed at every level here. Because I think that does speak to your evaluation of all those things, and you have to the ownership. I mean, the ownership, the front office, they have to take ownership of that situation, because I think it's one thing to say that you're going to give a guy a chance, but to give him everything, the world, to give your franchise, basically make him as your franchise player, giving all the obvious flaws that you see there, it really does make me question Rafael Stone's ability to judge character. And I think that's such a buzzword in sports, but to me, I mean, that's one of the most important factors that you could have in a player, especially when you're trying to build culture. I mean, you think of all the players they've brought in this past season. They bringing in Fred VanVleet, hard worker, champion. You have Dylan Brooks, hard worker, guy that's been in the playoffs. He came, got it from the mud. You got Jeff Green, the ultimate professional. Jock Landale, a professional, hard worker, a grinder. So all of these high character guys come into the organization. To me, coincidentally, at the same time, Ime Udoka comes into the organization. Then you think about the fact that the rumors for the Rockets all year were for James Harden, who, as we're seeing right now, is not, somebody that I wouldn't trust to be to change the culture in my organization. I'm not going to say for me personally the whether his like, I don't think it's hot. I think it's a lot of it's going to be dictated by how they execute this season. But I when the Rockets to me are in the playoffs and competing for championships, I don't see Rafael Stone as the GM that's going to be manning the helm at that point, because over the past few years, I haven't seen anything that he has done to really make me think that, wow, this guy really has it.
Yeah, great points. I do think having Ime here is like, I don't know if it's reassuring. It just feels better. It feels like there's an experienced voice in the room, a guy who's going to command respect of the players. I felt this way when they hired him. Rafael Stone was not going to control Ime Udoka. And I'm not saying that to slander Rafael. I'm just saying that Ime is, in my opinion, the most respected basketball voice here with this organization, where I don't think that was kind of the way with Silas. Maybe it should have been, but it really wasn't. So things are definitely looking up with Fred VanVleet, with Dylan Brooks, with Landale, guys who are going to come in, veterans. I can't remember how many years Landale's been in the league, but still more experienced, hard-nosed guys that are going to teach these players a lot more. I do think if this does not go well early, the next guy on the seat is Rafael. I mean, it just is. He was inexperienced as far as being a GM. He kind of came from a lawyer background. He did work quite a bit with Daryl Morey. His last, Daryl's last several years. But some of these things have to be looked at for sure by the Fertittas, and they have to decide if that's if they want a more experienced voice or if they want to continue with what they have. But I don't think this alone would get a change done, just sort of reading the tea leaves. But I do think that this season is very important for its future.
Yeah, I definitely think it's going to be based on the season performance. And I honestly think, I believe Tillman and Coach Udoka when they say they're trying to make the playoffs. I feel like they believe I don't think they're going to make the playoffs, but I think they're going to try to make the playoffs and try to make a push to be a competitive team. So I would assume that Tillman Fertitta has a objective marker in his mind of where he perceives a successful season would be for the Houston Rockets this year, given the fact that the past 3 years they were, that the sell was that we're going to do X, Y, and Z to get to this point in time where we have this cap space, and then we can then flip it around then. So, I'm not sure whether, because I think from a basketball standpoint, you can imagine that, given what has just happened over the past 3 years, it's probably not going to be this season that they turn it around. You give coach a year to install his culture and everything, then probably next season. But, I don't know if you have any insight on that. Is that something that they want to see, or is it like they want it now?
I think they want to see this team competing for the play-in. I think that's what ownership wants. What Tillman was sold this plan, 2023-24 was when, this point is what he was banking on. That's why he went through that, 2-3 years worth of pain. I think that's the way he'll be graded. I do think KPJ as a basketball player could have been a good sixth man if some of these character issues, some of these maturity issues were resolved. But without him now, they are going to be playing, I would think, some younger players. Amen Thompson's minutes are probably going to go up. That was a question before. I mean, I ran through all these numbers and I felt like he was probably going to get 13 minutes because KPJ was going to play. Now that's not an issue. They also right now, Stone is, the microscope is on him right now a little bit because he's trying to move Kevin Porter Jr.'s contract, not because he's not willing to cut it. I guess he technically isn't. He's got to have that expiring salary piece in the event that coming up on the deadline, he can aggregate it with others and acquire a player that comes on the market. And that was sort of what his hedge plan was. If, this KPJ thing didn't go well. And, being forced to cut him is really rough for that. Don't get me wrong. The moral aspects of all that, I think they obviously should cut him flat out. But that's what they're going through right now. If they could trade him for a $16 million contract that was committed to a box of air, they would do it. They don't need the player. They just need an aggregate, a salary they can aggregate later. And that's the issue they're dealing with right now.
I think that's a real issue. I was listening to
that too. I'm sorry. I was going to say they have to attach assets.
No, you're good. And it's several second round picks, I think was what was floated out initially by Shams. I was listening to Zach Lowe. He kind of brought it up about not really from the Rockets perspective, but from the other teams. And this was something that I had brought up. I think that in these types of matters, there obviously the PR matters. And one, you have to look at the teams that are able to make such a trade, which I don't think it's like a large market in the NBA that just has those salaries that's willing to just eat space in their cap just for anything. So you think about teams that aren't trying to compete. It's probably 4 or 5 of them. And then which markets are willing to do this? Because I feel like even though people use the precedent argument, I just don't know. I still think there's a lot about this case that is still unknown that teams would be wary, even if it's just in passing to take on that contract, to even associate themselves with that name. And Zach spoke about it a little bit. Shams pointed out a little bit about the optics of it. Me and Kelly talked about this. The NBA is a business. It's a entertainment industry, and PR matters. So I'm curious to see whether you've thought about any teams that would even be able to make a trade for Kevin Porter Jr.
My feeling is I don't know. I can't find it. I mean, I know there's some like contracts that might work. Alec Burks had been thrown around out there. I think he's at Detroit. I'm trying to remember, but
I think last he was in Detroit. Yeah.
Okay, and I really can't see it because I think you made a great point. If you understand how NBA contracts work, it's not really trading Kevin Porter Jr. You're just shifting salary around. It's all accounting is basically what those trades are. But to millions of casual fans in the city, the Memphis Grizzlies or the Toronto Raptors have acquired a guy who's currently going through a domestic violence case, and that's all they'll see. And so I think Rafael is going to have his work cut out for him if he's trying to do this. I think it's going to be extremely difficult. I would not be surprised. I don't know this for sure. I'm purely guessing, but I would not be surprised if they try to just send him home, hope this dies off, and he's still sitting there as a salary, as a contract. Not saying it's the right thing to do. I wouldn't be surprised if it happens. Like we have suspended him or something along those lines and just send him home, but he's still sitting there as an expiring in February. That's about honestly, I don't think that's attainable. I just can't see them
because it's going to linger. And you know what, Dave, with these types of things, it's drip, drip, drip with facts and information, court dates, and it just rubs the team back in the mud every time, even though they have. And I had said this on my last pod, like the Rockets are going into a point in their this rebuild cycle where the fan base should be optimistic. I hate that we have to even talk about these things. I hate,
Yes.
you know, obviously, like, it's humans involved, but on the basketball side, for the players that aren't Kevin Porter Jr., they're going to be being asked about this in training camp. This is going to be an issue that's going to be hung over their heads. And that's not fair to them either, to be involved in any of this business, these things that have come up. And I just can't see a world where he's still on the roster going into the deadline. Now, I know for Stone, like, if you look at it from a prudency standpoint, yes, that would be the best outcome for him on just to try to make that move, because he's trying to reconcile what we discussed earlier about trying to be competitive and win. And so you have to do that by using that space. You don't want that dead space. But then you think about the flip side of it is, one, what team is going to take it? And then if you're just offering seconds, does that mean, would he have to dip into the Brooklyn picks? Does he have to give up a first? Is a first worth giving up to have that flexibility to make yourself that much more competitive? Like, those are the questions that come to mind. Like, what is your limit? How
I mean,
high would you go to get this off of you?
if he has to give up a first to move off of Kevin Porter Jr., who he endorsed and pushed this entire time, I mean, that would get that seat really hot. The only first round picks they have are quite valuable. They don't have a lot of them, but like, they have their own, and they have the 2 Brooklyn picks, and their own have swap rights. It would be quite messy. They could protect them, but still, it would get messy. So if they have to do that, another whole level of criticism would be opened up. But, you bring up a good point. It would be, I think, the reason I think it's really hard to see any trade is, what team's going to be willing to give up an expiring contract, which is what the Rockets would want, take back KPJ, and then waive them themselves. And then they don't have their expiring contract to potentially flip at that. I mean, it's going to take a team that either just doesn't care. They're like, like an OKC of the past. Or, that team is giving the Rockets a 2-year deal or a 3-year deal that's an albatross, or one they just don't want. And that's
screwing us regardless, though. At the end of the day, like, you're just, and one thing, there are a lot of predatory general managers in the NBA that would be more than willing to screw the Rockets over this. And, they're not good guys that are, let's help out Rafael. It's going to be, they're gonna put him over for this, and I just don't see. I just don't see. This is just a messy situation altogether. I do have one thing, bro, I wanted to bring up. Now, I'm not gonna call you a reporter or anything like that, but I do have a little beef with the Rockets local reporters. Why are we finding out a lot of this stuff after the fact? Like, what is the deal with, and I call us, we're like a big city with a small market media, because if this was LA, Boston, New York, that shove on John Lucas would have been known probably around the country by now. What is it? Is it a leverage thing that the Rockets have with access with some of the local media people, that they just don't talk about these things? Why aren't we hearing these stories in real time?
Great question, and that's tough. I can only speak to myself. Some of the stuff, I mean, just being open and honest here, people are probably more willing to talk knowing that he's gone, right? They're not necessarily throwing him under the bus, but they feel less inclined, less concerned they could be outed, right? That's a possibility. Like I said, I can't speak for other reporters if they are aware of some of this stuff or not, but I think that's why some of this opens up. I'll say this. I will confess this. Like, I mentioned it a few times on Rockets Watch, but I did know Steven Silas did not view him as a point guard. I knew that for some time, and like I said, I mentioned it on Rockets Watch. Didn't make a huge deal out of it, but I guess the view of it is Steven Silas is the coach, and Kevin Porter, and if you put that out there and then they are going to answer this in a media circle, they're going to say, no, I think he's a point guard. And, coaches always supported me. And then you'd look silly, right?
Right.
It is absolutely private information, off the record, or told in a different environment. And so it's tough. It's a tough balance on some of that stuff, but I can't speak necessarily for the actual capital J journalists that are, way over my head. I just, been running this for a long time and just know a lot of people, talk to a lot of people, but, that's basically what I would say about that.
No, well, that was a very journalistic answer, to be honest. But I'll let you make it because I like you, bro. But definitely, I think that. Well, obviously, you guys do a great job on Rockets Watch. Sure. I am in the room a lot when I'm at work, so I don't want to do the Roosh thing where I have to hide in the closet to talk. But no, I definitely appreciate, and I'm not going to say. I guess it's because the situation is kind of weird. I'm not going to say vindicated, but I think that you've been trying to kind of tell the fan base about this for a while because you knew things that you probably didn't want to expose to everybody, but you've been trying to tell people about this for a while, and you took a lot of heat for it. Honestly, I gave Kevin Porter the benefit of the doubt that just by sheer growing up as an adult, he would start to mature. You get to that mid-20s, your brain starts forming completely. I guess I didn't know about all the other stuff that was going on. So the Rockets did a great job keeping it quiet. And given what you just said, I don't know, the culture there, if, there's an old saying, you got to get to the root of the problem. Steven Silas is gone. Kevin Porter's gone. A lot of the players that have been there through some of the quote unquote dysfunction the Rockets have had over the past few years are gone. Stone is the last one left. So he's going to have to really prove to the fan base, I'm sure to the Fertitas, that he is the right guy for the job. For the sake of the team, I wish him well, so that we can have a successful Rocket season. I'm really excited about the season, regardless of, all the circumstances circling us right now. Let me always ask the guests, what is your win totals for this year? What range do you can give it a range if you want? What is your range?
I can give it a better range. I was trying to say I had a number before. I'm a little lower, I think, than most. I think I'm in the 32 to 35 range. I'm not sure. I think is Vegas still around 30 and a half?
31.5, I think was.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm expecting 30s. I'm not expecting 40s. But I would say probably 32 to 34, 35. I think they'll be short of the play-in. I think they will exceed my expectations if they're actually really competing for the play-in. I think that would be progress. That would be, I think that they've made enough additions to say, okay, this team could be pretty good. But when you look around the West and you can easily rattle off 11 teams, 12 teams that on paper should be better than the Rockets. They're going to need a leap from some young players for sure.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. With Kevin Porter, it was 35 to 40. I'll say probably 33 to 38 wins. I do think he is on just strictly basketball. He's a huge loss for their bench units because his skill set is multidimensional. He does bring a lot to the table for them. I'll be curious to see how they pivot from this if they can. Is this something that we just end up just eating and just taking the loss on his deal this season? And on the legal side, this might go on for some time. And what's even funny, Dave? None of the visuals of this event have dropped yet. And that's coming.
Yeah,
the picture.
I forgot about that, to be honest. It's sad.
Yeah, all that stuff is going to resurface back up, and it's so y'all just be ready for all that. But brother, appreciate you, man, for coming through the Chop Shop again. Where can the people find you at if they've been living under a rock since 1990?
I appreciate it, Frank, man. It's always good to be on with you. It's at Clutchfans on social media, or clutchfans.net is the website. And man, like I said, I always enjoy coming on with you. It's like the Chop Shop's fantastic. You're doing a great job with it, and hopefully next time we do this, it'll be nothing but good vibes and
yes,
talking Rockets and better days.